My first experience with the Atari ST, like the Amiga, came through friends. Back at home I had the trusty BBC Micro and then later the IBM 5170. But let's be honest, those are not the hottest of games machines. So I spent a lot of time at my friends soaking up the excitement of 16-bit home computers like the Atari ST and later the Amiga. It was around 1987, maybe 1988, when I first encountered the Atari ST. My best friend got one for Christmas.
Happy holidays from Atari.
So at this point, the Amiga 500 had been released, but was very much the new kid on the block, the fledgling, whereas the Atari ST had been going since 1985. Yes, the Amiga 1000 was a thing, but let's face it, that eye-watering nearly £2,000 price tag wasn't going to make that a stocking filler, and it really wasn't on anybody's radar as a serious gaming machine. Suddenly it was clear that the Atari ST represented a whole new outlook on the home computer, and a whole new world compared to the 8-bit machines that I was used to. So you could say that I have in fact revisited my nostalgia out of order, going from the BBC Micro to the IBM 5170, then straight to the Amiga. And I think that journey was disrupted by having an Amiga 2000, a machine that I was just in awe of back in the day, something that I could never have afforded, donated to the channel. So it's about time we took a look at the Atari 520 ST. So the S stands for 16-bit, the T 32-bit. This is a reference to the 68000 processor, which its internal architecture is 32-bit, but it only has a 16-bit data bus exposed externally. And it is in fact an Atari 520 ST FM that I've managed to bag on eBay. And this is basically the Discovery Pack, but without the actual box. We can see it does in fact have all the original manuals, the Discovery Pack of discs, which may or may not work, we can test those later, a joystick, a mouse, and last but definitely not least, the Atari 520 STFM itself. Sponsors of this video are PCBWay. They provide PCB prototype fabrication from as little as $5. They also have a huge library of shared projects, and if you're not confident with a soldering iron, you can even get them to assemble them for you. PCBWay also have CNC machining and 3D printing services. All of this is available at PCBWay.com. Thanks PCBWay for sponsoring this video. This is a relatively unyellowed example. The keyboard looks pretty good. I noticed that it has a distinct sound, one that I can only describe as that of a baby's rattle. That coupled with the fact that this was sold as not tested, and I genuinely think it was not tested. The person I bought it off was just clearing stuff out of their loft, and most of the other items were bits of haberdashery rather than anything electronic. Those two reasons alone are enough for me to dig in and make sure there's nothing awry. I suspect that the rattling is bits of the case that have inevitably just fallen off because somebody looked at this machine slightly wrong one day. And this will be indeed the first time I've taken an Atari ST apart. So this is a journey of discovery for me as much as it probably is for some of you watching at home. Now, just to cover what FM stands for, the F is internal floppy drive. The original Atari ST required an external floppy drive if you wanted to load or save the disk. And the M is for modulator. That means it's got an inbuilt TV modulator, something that the Amiga didn't get until the 600 and 1200 series of computers came out. In the interests of safety alone, I'm going to check that the voltages produced by this power supply are somewhere close to spec. I'm expecting 12 volts and 5 volts. Unlike the Amiga, the Atari ST doesn't have any minus volt lines. So either as a result of shipping or my ham-fisted technique in taking the case apart, we've now definitely got some cracks that may or may not have been there before. Some of these parts were held on by a literal thread. So here we are, piecing this Atari ST case back together, like a kind of plastic airfix kit.
Whoa. Oh. Oh.
If, like me, you've ever wondered why these old cases seem to just fall apart, it's not just bad luck, it's all about how these plastics age over time. The Atari ST's casing is made from ABS plastic, a pretty durable material back in the day. But here's the thing, ABS has a bit of a dark side. The secret lies in its composition. There's a component in it called butadiene, which gives the plastic its flexibility. Over time though, butadiene starts to oxidize, breaking down and leaving the plastic brittle and fragile. And if that wasn't bad enough, these poor old cases were also subjected to UV light over the years. Basically, plastic's kryptonite. UV light breaks down the chemical bonds in ABS, robbing it of its strength and turning it into something that cracks at the slightest touch. And then you've got the environment working against you too. Heat, humidity, and even air pollution can speed up the degradation. And let's not forget about the plasticizers, the stuff that kept this case flexible in its glory days. Over time, they either evaporate or migrate to the surface, leaving behind a shell that's more rigid and more likely to snap. Now, you might be wondering, was this always going to happen? Well, kind of. Plastic just ages. The polymer chains that make up ABS get weaker with time. It's like the material has an inevitable expiration date. Add in a few decades of neglect and voila, here we are, gluing this poor thing back together. So yeah, it's a bit of a rescue mission, but with a little patience and some careful repair, the Atari ST will be back looking and feeling like the icon that it is, or as near as I can get it. My goal is basically just having it all back in one piece and screwed together properly. And by now you probably know that I'm not afraid of spraying the odd case here and there, but I'm not going to do that at this time, but I might consider doing it later.
Tomorrow.
Well, while we've got the machine apart, it definitely makes sense to look at the keyboard. I'm just going to remove all the keys, give it a good clean up, clean all the keys, and then put it back together again. The internal floppy drive is suffering from a little bit of surface rust. Appears to spin perfectly well, so I'm just going to strip it down, clean the heads, and check for any other damage. Poking about, it looks like the two capacitors on the underside, the surface mount ones, have started to leak. Some of the discoloration around the nearby solder and some of the crud that looks like it's building up underneath is a telltale sign. So I'm going to quickly recap this floppy drive. So now we've stripped it down, checked for power, cleaned the keyboard, and recapped the floppy drive, it's time to put it all back together. Also, the movement on the mouse isn't exactly smooth, so let's dig into that and remove this horrible corrosion. Well, it's come the time we're going to have to plug it in and see if it actually works. Well, thank God for that. So as a final homage to the Atari ST, let's have a look at some of the software that came on that discovery pack, particularly the games. And I'll apologise in advance, the recording of the sound from the Atari is awful. Well, if you found this video any combination of informative or entertaining, then please consider subscribing to the channel. And while you're here, why not check this out next?